Okay, so let's jump right back in. In the first part of our explainer, we dug into one of the most famous challenges to Christian ethics, the Euthyphro dilemma. It's a really old argument, but you still hear it all the time, used to try and trap believers.
And here's the trap, right? On the one side, if something's good just because God says so, then morality seems totally arbitrary. He could have commanded cruelty and poof, it would be good. But on the other side, if God commands things because they're already good, well then goodness is some standard that's outside of and above God, which means he's not really ultimate. It feels like this perfectly sealed logical box.
But here's the thing. What if it's not a real dilemma? What if it's actually a classic false choice? You know, where you're presented with two options as if they're the only ones, when really a third and much better answer has been sitting there the whole time. In fact, Christianity has been talking about this third way for centuries, and it just completely dismantles the trap. So this is the key. The solution isn't to pick one of those bad options. It's to offer a third way, and here it is. God doesn't command things because they are good, and things aren't good just because God commands them. No, the answer is that God is goodness itself. Now let that sink in for a second, because this reframes everything. Goodness isn't some law book God has to check, and it's not a rule book he just made up. Instead, God's own eternal, unchangeable, perfect character is the ultimate standard of what good even means.
What that means is his commands aren't just random whims. They are consistent expressions that flow directly and necessarily from who he is. Philosophers have a fancy term for this. They call it the ontological foundation. But all it really means is that goodness is grounded in the very being of God.
To make this super clear, think about it like this. We don't say the sun obeys some external law of lightness that exists above it, right? And we also don't say that light is just some random thing the sun decided to invent. Of course not. The sun, by its very nature, is a light-giving thing. Light flows from what the sun is, and in the same way, goodness flows from who God is.
This really just illustrates the point perfectly. The philosopher Catherine Rogers sums it up beautifully. This isn't some clever word game. It's a deep theological claim about the nature of reality itself. God isn't under the moral law, and he's not just making it up. He is the moral law.
And listen, this solution isn't some modern idea that philosophers invented just to get out of a tough question. It's an idea that is deeply and consistently rooted in the Bible itself.
Just take a look at 1 John 4:8. The text doesn't say that God has love or that he approves of love. It makes this incredible claim that God is love. It's not just a quality he has, it's his actual essence.
Jesus himself makes this exact same connection. Remember when someone calls him a good teacher? He immediately pushes back and points to the ultimate source, saying no one is good except God alone. He identifies ultimate goodness exclusively with the very being of God. And you see the same pattern in the Psalms. Righteousness and justice aren't external rules that God has to follow. No, they're expressions of his character, flowing out from his nature into the world. So once you put this third option on the table, the whole original dilemma just dissolves. God's commands can't be arbitrary because they flow from his unchanging, loving nature. And morality isn't independent of God because goodness finds its very definition in who he is. It's why he could never command cruelty, because that would be a complete contradiction of his essential nature. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. The skeptic who loves to use this dilemma almost never considers that their own worldview faces the exact same structural problem. So let's just turn the tables for a minute. If a secular person tries to ground morality in something like, say, human nature or evolution, we can ask the same kind of question. Is something good simply because it's a part of our evolved human nature? If that's the case, isn't that just as arbitrary as the first horn of the original dilemma? Or is our nature good because it happens to line up with some independent standard of goodness? And if so, where did that standard come from? This is a massive problem. Evolution, from a purely naturalistic point of view, gave us instincts for compassion and cooperation, which is great, but it also gave us instincts for aggression, for tribalism, for selfishness. So on what basis do we call one set of instincts moral and the other set immoral? There's just no objective naturalistic reason to pick one over the other.
So it all boils down to this. You simply cannot get a moral ought from atoms. You can't get genuine moral obligation out of just matter, energy, and time. Atheism gets stuck with its very own Euthyphro problem, but it doesn't have that third way out that theism does.
So as we wrap this up, let's just crystallize the whole argument into 3 key takeaways. This is what you really need to remember the next time someone brings up this famous dilemma.
First, remember that it's a false dilemma. The choice between an arbitrary God and a subordinate God is not the only choice. Second, the Christian answer is that God's very nature is the standard. Goodness is rooted in his eternal, perfect character. And third, the secular worldview actually faces the same challenge, but it doesn't have a coherent third option to ground objective morality.
Ultimately, the Christian worldview offers a foundation for morality that is stable, objective, and deeply personal. It doesn't start with a list of abstract rules. It starts with a person. Just like the Apostle John wrote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God." Before there were any commands, there was a character. Before there were any rules, there was a person. And that person is the very foundation and the light of all truth.